Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes.
So were you surprised in the book when Hope went into hospital and she immediately was given quite, I thought for her point of view, it was quite a lot of food. She was like told you have to drink a lot of
in
milk.
one go. But because I didn't necessarily assess Hope, I couldn't comment on whether it was too much or too little. There are a variety of different factors that would be taken into account at this point. They wouldn't have given her so much food unless they were happy that her body would be able to handle that food. So she was given certain amounts of things that she had to eat. She was also given something called Ensure, which is a liquid supplement in a carton. It doesn't taste very nice, and I'm sure that when we speak to Hope, hopefully, because I'd like to get Hope on the podcast, it tastes foul. It is the most...
It comes in a variety of flavours.
It does, and it comes in milk varieties and it comes in juice varieties.
And there's a soup version, isn't there?
There is a soup. Which, The only thing that I really used to like, which is going to say something, is something called collagen. And collagen is a fat supplement. And if you put that into a Scandi shake, which is another type of supplement, you could get 1,000 calories in 300 mils. It was the best thing ever. And it tasted like a McDonald's milkshake.
Wow.
My favourite. In comparison, the problem is, or it's not really a problem, but in those juice drinks / milk drinks, what they've done is they've put in electrolytes and other things and minerals and vitamins and all of those kind of things. And that is the thing that changes the taste. And, it's a bad day when you were on the ward and you gave someone on the ward one of these juices or milks, and it's usually elderly care because they can't taste anything. And they're like, this is really nice. And you're stood there going, bleh.
I was going to say, I think most of these drinks were designed for elderly people in mind, for where their appetite does drop and they're not eating enough. And, they do say that as we go older, we eat less and we sleep less and things like that. And so they weren't really designed for anorexia survivors.
Well, they're not really designed. Well, it's basically they're designed to be nutritionally complete in a certain number of cartons. So you could essentially live off these drinks. And that's what we're trying to get when we're trying to get the food and the fluids and stuff into Hope.
If you did live off those, there would be issues though, would there? Well,
it depends. There are ones that have added fibre. So when I was in the hospitals, we used to use Fortisip, which is another type of nutritional supplement. And there would be things such as Fortisip protein and Fortisip fibre and things like that. So it can have detrimental effects on your bowels. And that's a conversation killer.
Yeah, it is. Well, I suppose this is where I say about how I think that the anorexia caused my IBS. And, I think it is around your body needs food and it needs solids and it needs liquids. We're not designed to live on a liquid diet.
Although we can.
Yeah.
And we can also live on something that is directly into the vein. So if your gut stops working, you can have something called TPN, which is total parenteral nutrition, which goes directly into the vein that connects in your neck to your heart.
Wow.
So it's basically, because you haven't got the stomach, it's broken down to its basic levels. And you can get your entire nutrition via a tube in your neck.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very...
That's only in extreme cases.
Yeah. I mean, it talks about when Hope is in the hospital, someone coming in and being an emergency patient.
Yeah.
And them having tubes and everything everywhere. So that kind of patient we're talking about might end up with something like that.
Depending if their system, so they might...
And especially if they're unconscious, I imagine?
Well, they would more likely end up on a nasal tube. So you've got a nasogastric tube, which goes up through the nose and into the stomach. What you find with that is that, particularly with the people that don't want to eat, they pull that out quite readily because it's easily accessible. If the person is more likely to be a chronic case, then you can put in a thing called a PEG or a PEG, which is a percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy or a percutaneous endoscopic jejunostomy. So it goes.
Which you don't say when you're drunk.
No, That would be an interesting thing. But it's a tube that goes directly through the stomach. So it's a tube outside the body, but goes in through the stomach, through a hole, into either your stomach directly or into the top of your intestine.
So why do you think when Hope's admitted, she doesn't seem to, apart from the drinks, she seems to be able to, be put onto the food and to...
Without knowing her case, I would assume that because there is some small level of her eating...
So some compliance with getting involved. Because
really you want to try and get people back onto eating as quickly as possible because these things do not taste very nice.
No.
And if you can facilitate getting them eating normally again as quickly as possible, then that's going to have a better long-term effect.
Yeah. I found it interesting when she's in the hospital and she's talking about the other patients and how she's jealous of some of the others. And although they're usually friends and they seem very nice with each other, they then get envious when one has skipped a meal or been able to
get
manipulate
one over
the system.
They get one over on the nursing team or they get one over on whoever's around.
And they kind of like send hate eyes at those people because they weren't able to do that.
And again, you're in hospital because you've been told that you are going to die, but yet you still have this compulsion and this urge to minimize as many calories getting into your system as possible.
Well, it's so irrational, and I think that shows how irrational it is. If you were told that you're going to die if you don't eat, then, if you're still not wanting to, you can see how this is a mental health condition. This isn't a rational thinking person.
Exactly, and it's a bit like when we talked about OCD, when there's this compulsion to touch a certain light switch.
Or the writing.
Yep.
When
exactly.
we talked
hypergraphia.
Yeah, where it was just such a compulsion, even when it hurt. Diane was still writing on her arm, on the walls, on anything she'd get her hands on, know. And I think it definitely shows, this compulsive element. Is it true? I don't know if you even know this, but often you see anorexia and OCD as diagnosis together.
I have no idea, to be honest. That might be something we ask the secret psych.
Yeah, only because obviously...
I would have thought so because of the compulsion aspect. And we also see in the book that someone has not or had an anorexia diagnosis, but that has gone on to OCD.
Yeah.
And she's in hospital being treated for OCD. So I think they probably are quite hand in hand, but I wouldn't want to guarantee that.
No, maybe
judgment.
It's a question for the secret psych.
Yeah.
Especially as I think talking about the personalities of people, and sometimes I've heard online that it's often the A class, the A...
Type A personalities.
That's what I'm saying. The type A personalities that get things like this because
of the perfectionist nature.
Yeah. The compulsion to be perfect. And so that leads to you want to have a perfect body as well as everything. And I know that definitely for me, I was trying to be the perfect child. And so probably there was an element...
would love you.
Yeah. Well, I felt so worthless and they told me that they didn't love me. And so, I had to try and be the best child I could, and ended up being probably, my mum says I was the hardest out of all three of us.
How could you?
The troublemaker, but
nothing's changed. I'm joking.
Only sometimes. But it is maybe that perfectionist nature, and I definitely have had to deal with not trying to be a perfectionist, especially being a teacher. You can't be a perfectionist and be a teacher because and I did try as an NQT, and when I was first training, NQT means newly qualified teacher. I did try and be a perfectionist and do everything right, but you have to let stuff go. Otherwise, and you burn out. And I think that's one of the reasons we do see a lot of teachers burn out early.
But that just isn't achievable, being a perfectionist all the time. And I think you're pushing yourself too much to achieve that. So in total, Hope probably does spend a year in hospital, which she didn't realise to begin with. She was like, I'm just going to go in and I'll be out again. It'll be fine.
She thought it was going to be a quick fix, a few weeks, few months at most, and back out again.
Yeah, but she was so adamant. If you read the story of Hope, she's adamant that she is going to continue having this friendship with anorexia.
Yeah.
And there's a certain point when that flips. And I think maybe we can ask Hope for her to think back and see if she remembers what flipped that switch and at what point she was like, hang on a minute, I'm not going to go back to my old ways.
Well, she starts to realise that the voice of anorexia is...
not helping.
No, and is actually trying to get her to get to a point again where she could die.
And she wants to leave hospital, and you can't leave hospital until you're starting to make progress. And if your weight does slip, you end up back in hospital. So she is adamant that she's going to get better, which is fantastic. But
And the doctors do tell her as well that if she relapses too harsh, it actually is going to be harder to get her body back. And it increases her risk of dying around her, because of the heart, and her organs can't take the strain.
Yeah, so it's important for Hope to try and remain as healthy as possible, and to kick anorexia up the butt and tell her to leave her alone, which she does, and I think that's fantastic. But the thing that I thought was really insightful, and I think is very, very important for people to understand, is that even though she was being discharged because she had made such progress, she was still so scared about falling back into her old ways.
Yeah.
Even though she had learned coping mechanisms, even though she had learned different ways to prevent these things.
It's a change of environment, and it's less control of you and checking up on you, and more risk of actually being able to manipulate the situation again.
And she also talks about being back in her own room, where she still has the sick stains on the floor, where she has purged, and you're putting yourself back in the same environment where you are able to be, again, I don't want to say it like this, but really it was her being successful at having anorexia. And she is so concerned that the overwhelming urge to use your past coping mechanisms, which is what I do all the time. I mean,
this isn't unique to anorexia. This is any mental health issue,
particularly with like addictions or anything where you are doing a particular behaviour that may not be beneficial and may be self-destructive. It is so easy to fall back into those past behaviours.
Well, you even go to habits like smoking, which is and the amount of people that fall back into smoking and have to re-give up and things like that. And then we now recognise that alcoholism is a disease and that there will be relapses, but you have to do your best every day and take each day as it comes. And we understand that. We need to broaden that understanding to actual mental health issues as well.
I completely agree. But even though she has like this staggered discharge, so there are certain points where she's allowed to go home for a day or a few hours, and that increases over time until she's fully discharged.
I liked how involved she was in that, because the family want to go on holiday, and she's asked, you can go if you want and you can spend this time, but she is scared and she decides to stay at the hospital and not go on the holiday because she actually needs that time. She doesn't want the risk of that being like that. And actually the family found that very therapeutic to actually be away from her, which that may sound awful.
Sad, doesn't it? It sounds like, again, you can read the guilt in the pages, is that they are guilty about leaving Hope at home, and the fact that they are feeling in some ways a little bit relieved by the fact that they don't have to think
especially
about
her little brother
anorexia.
Who has seen and supported and was actually involved in helping Hope cover up some of the anorexia. And so I think he in particular is pleased that she's not on the holiday, but then feels guilty for feeling that as well, and talks to Mum about it, which I'm really glad he does, and he doesn't hide that. And actually hopefully, and this might be something else we can ask Hope, it's helped the whole family communicate with each other a bit better and to make sure that they are checking in on each other, because, the mental health issues affect a whole family and a whole group. Now, she does find that the routine is so important when she comes out, making sure that she eats at the right time and she gets up at the right time and she, does everything, and she has snack time and she has dinner time, and those are stuck to. And even when Mum is cooking, she's watching and making sure it is exactly what she needs to have and how many calories it is and all this kind of stuff.
Because in some ways, again, it's probably coming back to the anorexia. She is a bit worried that Mum's going to sneak some additional things in there that she's not aware of. And I think that her aim of going to university and that goal of being able to get to university was extremely important for Hope to achieve. And she does. And she also gets to go travelling, which I think she finds extremely useful as well, because when she is travelling, she isn't necessarily finding that she can do the calorie counting. And she realises that particular thing she needs to let go. She needs to stop counting the calories on her plate, because that is also impacting the way she is viewing food, just generally. So I think that's quite important. But also the fact that she does talk about having a relapse.
Yeah.
And this is something that I find extremely difficult to understand,
And I also think that this would be extremely difficult for others that don't have mental health issues to understand. So there's this thing where you just think that, oh, it's good, I'm over this particular bump in the road, and you are on this straight line of achieving healthiness.
And some people do. Some people have one instant of mental health problems.
And then that's it.
And then, never has another one again. But that's not everybody.
No. And that isn't the case for Hope. And we think, and it's fantastic, that when she starts to slip, and this is unfortunately after a death, I think it's her grandma that passes away, and she starts to see herself getting or letting anorexia back into her life. But she handles it completely differently. She reaches out for help. And I can't commend Hope enough for identifying that she was falling back into old habits and that she needed some additional support, which she gets, which is fantastic.
Even if that isn't via medical health professionals, because she doesn't meet the criteria anymore to be treated for her anorexia.
But in terms of relapse, it's one of the things associated with mental health. There are times when you fall back into old ways. And that, I think, is particularly difficult for people to understand. I mean, we saw it in Finding Audrey, for example, when they go, well, you're cured now. You are cured. And it's not that simple. And I have had relapses where I have self-harmed after being self-harm free for 5 to 6 years. And just, I had to keep reminding myself to not be harsh on myself and not beat myself up.
We don't,
because
we don't judge people for if their cancer comes back.
No.
We don't judge people if they can't control their diabetes and it causes them to need a medical attention.
Yeah.
We don't judge people if they broke their leg for a second time.
Or have an additional heart attack, for example. We just don't do those things.
We don't. And actually, that's how we should view mental health relapse, that actually it is a reoccurrence of a disease. It is a reoccurrence of a serious disease that actually we do commend her for going to get help, and it would have been probably easier to actually just let it back in.
Well, it would be easier in the sense of not having to fight against it. But then Hope doesn't want to be back in the same place as she was before. She doesn't want to let anorexia take that much control, which she did in the past.
Yeah.
And I do think that is extremely important. And it would be, in some ways, it would be good to speak to Hope to see how she's dealing now.
Yeah.
With her anorexia.
She goes around and speaks in a lot of schools and to companies and lots of different people, mental health. She's a real mental health advocate for anorexia and for, promoting the discussion around it, which I think is really important.
And I think that's probably something that as families and as groups of people, we tend to shy away from.
Yeah.
And I don't know necessarily if it's because of the stigma, because I think that is starting to decrease, but I do think that's a huge part of it. But I also think that we need to educate people on how to talk about mental health with others because we're scared.
Yeah.
It's like, if I speak to this person about their particular mental health issue, I mean, when you were off sick with stress and anxiety and you came back, no one asked you how you were doing. However, if you'd been off with a cold or a stomach bug or something, they would have gone, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
And it's that scaredness of people going, well, if I speak about it, am I just like poking the bear, so to speak?
Will I make them cry?
Yeah. Does it matter if you make that person cry? I mean, you are showing that you are supportive. You are showing that you care by speaking to them and not hiding behind the subject.
I actually found when I had a student who had anorexia was in their life, and I wanted to share the fact that I had it in my life and that I'd been dealing with it and coping with it, and now as a grown up, and I'm actually overweight now.
So am I. It's all right.
But I felt I needed to speak to the parents first. So I spoke to the mum and said, look, I want to share this, but I don't want to do it without
your consent and your knowledge, which is good.
It's good, but I don't know any other thing that I have dealt with, like depression, that I would actually have asked the parents first. And I think I found, now thinking about it, I find that quite interesting. Actually, I felt I needed parental consent to share my story with a student when actually I do that regularly when I talk about, going to see a counsellor and dealing with childhood, abuse and things like that.
Yeah, no, I do think that is quite interesting because, I don't know, was it that in some ways you were concerned because if you came forward with that information, how that would then impact the student? And if she had additional questions, I'm assuming it's a she, I'm making assumptions here, that if she had additional questions, she could then go to mum and dad about it, maybe, just as a heads up.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, I think that it's great that you talk about it openly with your students. I think that gives them someone to be able to relate to and understand that, yes, you might know a bit about what she's going through, but I think as it goes on, I think it will become easier in some ways for you and for the parents. But it's still that it's such a taboo subject. It's one of those things that people just generally don't talk about.
At another meeting I was at where a student and a parent was there, and we were talking about this student who they weren't sure if it was anorexia or if it was a stomach issue, and there was like all these medical tests going on and things like that. But the mother turned around and was like, we've dealt with this before, and I had it, and actually I said, I did have it as well. And we ended up that actually all of us either knew someone or who had dealt with anorexia or had anorexia, and yet everyone was like, but yet no one talks about this, and no one talks about it at school. When we do healthy eating, we don't talk about anorexia. We define what they are as scientific terms probably for the kids, but that is it. We don't explain, how it can come about or why and what to look out for and what to do if you think somebody is suffering.
Or if you are yourself suffering, about how to get help, how to reach out. And I'd just like to put a little plug in here. This isn't because we're sponsored by them or anything, but we went and got recently a fantastic handbook by Rethink, which is specifically aimed at how to talk about mental health with other people.
Yeah.
And I shall put up a picture of it. And if you do want a copy, we have a few because I got a bit happy and stole them off the chairs that no one was sat on. So I have a stack of these particular flyers and booklets. So if you would like one, let me know. I'm more than happy to send it out to you. But I think that is extremely important. And I think maybe that should be something that is incorporated into the curriculum for students to understand how to speak about mental health, but also for parents as well.
Definitely.
Because I think it needs to come from, in some ways, it needs to come from parents. I mean, I'm just going to say this, I have been slowly getting through 13 Reasons Why, and it has taken me a long time because I felt quite
affected by it.
Yeah, definitely. And you look at that and it takes for something to happen for parents to then address the situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it is taken for Hannah Baker's suicide for them to then discuss it with their children.
And even then, the school try and cover things up, and the school try and not discuss it. It actually becomes, and we'll see if you when you go on to season 2, spoiler alert. They actually make it against the rules to talk about suicide at school.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's making me twitchy already.
Yeah. And they do that because they're trying to protect the children.
But it's not about protecting the children. It's about making those that are having these feelings feeling
validated
and
supported.
And now you've taken that means away.
Yeah, you've ostracized them. And so they're going to feel even more isolated, even more alone, even more unsupported, and therefore more likely to suffer worse symptoms and, at the very extreme, take their life by suicide as well.
We'd like to end by giving a big shout out to Hope and say thank you so much for being so open in this book. It is definitely worth a read, so if you haven't read it yet, you should head over to our website where you can find a link to purchase the book. Also, you can find Hope on Twitter, and she's very active on Twitter, and so if you want to find out more about Hope, you can go to @HopeVirgo.
She also has her own website, which links all on her Twitter and everything, and you can see what she's been doing to really campaign about this. So thank you, Hope. We hope to get you on and have a discussion because it'll be really interesting. And thank you so much for the book.
Yeah, definitely. So until next time, it's okay not to be okay.
And if you're not okay, talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next episode will be special author interview with Hope Virgo. Our next episode with the secret psychiatrist will be on ADHD. And our next book will be A Beginner's Guide to Being Mental, an A to Z, From Anxiety to Zero Given by Natasha Devon, MBE. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter and follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.